Part 1. The city was waking up slowly, the way it always did on winter mornings, with pale sunlight trying its best to cut through the gray sky. People rushed along the sidewalk, with their scarves pulled high and their shoulders drawn up to protect themselves from the cold. Cars honked, buses sighed to a stop, and the whole place felt busy and impatient. But in the middle of all that noise and movement, there was one person who seemed completely still. She sat beside an old public piano that the city had placed in the plaza years ago. Most people barely noticed it anymore. Its paint was chipped, the keys were scratched, and half the time, pigeons sat on top of it as if it belonged to them. But the girl leaned against it as though it were her only friend. Her clothes were warm and didn't look warm enough for the weather. Her shoes were too thin, and her hair fell in messy strands around her face. Anyone passing by could see she hadn't slept well in a long time. That morning, as people pushed past her without giving her a second look, a black car pulled up near the plaza. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He looked completely different from the world she lived in. His long coat was dark and expensive, and his shoes looked like they had never touched a dirty sidewalk before. His hair was neat, his steps were confident, and his eyes scanned the area quickly, the way busy people often did. His name was Daniel, a man who rarely slowed down for anything. He had built a company from the ground up, and now lived a life where every minute was scheduled. Meetings, calls, deals, everything was always rushing forward, and he had learned to move along with it. Even now, he was supposed to be heading into a tall building across the street for a meeting he didn't particularly want to attend, but something caught his eye as he crossed the plaza. At first, he didn't know what it was. Maybe it was the way the girl sat there so quietly, almost blending into the background. Or maybe it was the small cardboard sign next to her that read, in shaky handwriting, "Trying to earn food." The message wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simple, almost too honest. Daniel slowed for just a moment. He wasn't the type to stop and talk to strangers. He especially wasn't the type to get caught up in emotional situations. His world was built around logic, numbers, and decisions that had nothing to do with people on the street. But something about the girl's stillness, or maybe her quiet strength, bothered him in a way he couldn't explain. He looked at the piano sitting next to her. It seemed almost funny, a homeless girl beside an instrument most people saw as a decoration. Something about it made him raise his eyebrow. The situation felt strange, almost unreal. He stepped closer without really meaning to. The cold wind brushed past him, pushing his coat back. The girl didn't look up at first. Her eyes were focused on the ground, as if that was easier than meeting the eyes of people who usually walked past her. Daniel cleared his throat lightly, not sure why he was even trying to start a conversation. "Hey," he said, his tone casual, almost careless. "That your piano?" Her eyes lifted just enough for him to see how tired they were. She shook her head. "No, it's just here." Her voice was soft, almost too soft for the noisy morning around them. Daniel nodded slowly, unsure of what to say next. He wasn't used to awkward moments. They didn't fit into his schedule. So he tried to make a joke, mostly to fill the silence. "Can you even play the thing?" he asked with a short laugh. The girl didn't laugh with him. She just blinked slowly. Daniel realized the joke wasn't very good, but he tried again. "Tell you what," he said, pointing at the piano with a small smirk. "If you can play something on that, I'll buy you breakfast." He said it the way someone says something they don't expect to matter. A light comment, something he assumed she'd ignore or smile at awkwardly. But instead, the girl did something he didn't expect. She stood up. Her legs were shaky, as if she had been sitting for too long, or maybe because she hadn't eaten enough. She brushed dust off her clothes without looking at him, then stepped in front of the piano. Daniel watched with mild curiosity and a little amusement. He didn't think she could really play. The instrument looked broken anyway. The girl lifted the lid and touched the keys with the tips of her fingers. Her hands were thin and slightly red from the cold. Daniel expected her to hit a wrong note or press something out of tune. Maybe create a noise loud enough to scare the pigeons away. Instead, she paused for a moment, took a small breath, and placed both hands on the keyboard dot. The first sound that came out wasn't clumsy. It wasn't broken or hesitant. It was soft and smooth, like the opening of a story told in music. Daniel's smirk faded a little. He tilted his head, trying to understand what he was hearing. The girl kept going, her fingers moving with surprising control. The melody began to grow, filling the cold air with a warmth the weather couldn't provide. People walking by slowed down, their conversations fading as they looked toward the piano. Even the city noises seemed to soften. The honking, the footsteps, the rushing, all of it felt less important compared to the notes rising from the old instrument. Daniel didn't move. He wasn't smiling anymore. In fact, he wasn't sure what he was feeling. He had expected a simple tune, something childish or basic. But the girl played with emotion, the kind that comes from memories and heartache and hope. Her body stayed still, but her hands moved with a confidence that didn't match her worn clothes or tired eyes. More people gathered. A couple stopped with their coffee cups, listening in surprise. A man walking his dog stood still, watching the girl as if she were doing something impossible. A teenager recorded on his phone. The plaza shifted from a place of noise to a place where everyone shared the same quiet awe. Daniel swallowed hard. His usual world, the fast-paced, practical, demanding world, felt far away. He had stumbled into something unexpected. Something real. When the girl finally stopped playing, the last note hung in the air before fading gently. The small crowd applauded, some softly, some with excitement. A few even dropped money into the girl's small donation cup, but she didn't smile. She simply sat back down, as if the music had been nothing special. Daniel stepped closer, trying to understand what he had just witnessed. "Where did you learn that?" he asked, his voice softer than before. The girl looked at him with the same calm, tired eyes. "I just learned," she said quietly. Daniel frowned slightly. "Just learned? That wasn't something you just learned. That was—" He stopped himself. He wasn't even sure how to describe it. The girl pulled her sleeves over her cold hands. "You said you'd buy breakfast," she reminded him. Her words were simple, honest, no drama, no begging, no desperation, just reminding him of what he'd promised. Daniel nodded, feeling something strange in his chest, a mix of guilt, surprise, and something he didn't want to name. "Right," he said. "Yeah, I did." He checked his watch. He was already late for his meeting. His assistant would probably send him another message soon. His schedule would be thrown off. Someone might complain. But none of that felt important. He turned toward her again. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you something warm to eat." The girl stood slowly, gathering her small cardboard sign and the few coins she had collected. She followed him without a word. Her steps were small and careful, as though she wasn't used to being invited anywhere. And as they walked toward the small diner across the street, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that this strange moment, this simple breakfast with a girl who played the piano better than most adults he had heard, was going to matter more than any meeting he might miss. He just didn't know why yet, but he was about to find out. Part 2. The diner across the street was warm in a way the plaza could never be. The windows were fogged from the heat inside, and the smell of fresh coffee hung in the air. People sat in small booths, talking quietly or eating breakfast before heading off to work. It wasn't fancy, but it felt safe, and for the girl walking behind Daniel, that safety alone made the place feel almost magical. Daniel held the door open for her. She hesitated for a moment, as if unsure she was allowed to enter, then stepped inside slowly. Her eyes moved around the room, taking in everything: the bright lights, the warm colors on the walls, the plates filled with food. It had probably been a long time since she had been in a place where people sat without worry. A server walked over with a friendly smile. "Table for two?" she asked. Daniel nodded, and they were led to a booth in the corner. The girl sat down carefully, her hands folded in her lap. She seemed unsure of what to do, almost like she was afraid she might break something. "Order anything you want," Daniel told her, gently placing a menu in front of her. She looked at the menu as if it were something rare. Her eyes scanned the pictures: pancakes, toast, eggs, soup, sandwiches. Her fingers moved slowly over the edges of the pages. After a long moment, she whispered, "Is it really okay?" "Yes," Daniel said, nodding. "I meant what I said." She took a breath, and finally pointed timidly at a simple breakfast: scrambled eggs, toast, and a small bowl of fruit. "That's all?" Daniel asked. "You can order more if you want." She shook her head quickly. "That's enough." There was something about the way she said it, soft but firm, that made him think she wasn't used to wanting things. Maybe she didn't know how anymore. When the server left, there was a small silence between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, but neither of them seemed to know what to say at first. Daniel watched her quietly, noticing how she held her arms close to her body, as though trying to take up as little space as possible. He wondered how long she had been living like this. Finally, he asked, "How long have you been playing the piano?" The girl looked down at her hands. "I don't know. A while." He leaned forward a little. "Did someone teach you?" She shook her head. "No. I used to listen to people play. Then I tried to copy it." Daniel was silent for a moment. Copying something by ear was one thing. Playing the way she did was something else entirely. It was talent, raw, natural, powerful talent. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. It wasn't the kind of hesitation that came from hiding something. It was the kind that came from being asked too rarely. "Mia," she said finally. Daniel nodded slowly, letting her take her time. "Nice to meet you, Mia." The server came back with their food, placing plates on the table. Mia's eyes widened when she saw all the colors on her plate: the yellow of the eggs, the bright fruit, the warm toast. She held her fork for a long moment before taking her first bite. When she did, she closed her eyes for a second, as though her body couldn't believe it was finally tasting something warm. Daniel looked away, giving her the space to eat without feeling watched. But he couldn't help glancing back every few seconds, noticing how carefully she ate, how she seemed to savor each bite. "You play better than anyone I've heard on that piano," he said after a while. Mia shrugged lightly, as if she didn't know what to do with a compliment. "I just tried to make something nice." He leaned back in his seat. "You made more than something nice. You made people stop. That doesn't happen often in this city." Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. She stared at her food, trying to hide a small smile that threatened to appear. No one had told her she was good in a long time. After she finished most of her food, she asked quietly, "Why did you stop today?" Daniel blinked. "What do you mean?" "People walk past me every day," she said, her voice steady but gentle. "They don't look. They don't hear anything. But you stopped. Why?" He didn't have an easy answer. He looked out the window for a moment. "I don't know," he admitted. "Something just made me look." Mia nodded as if she understood. She wasn't expecting a big reason. She wiped her fingers on a napkin and looked at him again. "Do you always keep your promises?" He thought about it. "I try to." She looked relieved, though she tried to hide it. There was another pause before Daniel asked, "Where are you staying?" Her shoulders tensed. She looked down, tracing the edge of her napkin. "Just around," she said quietly. "That's not a real answer," he said gently, not accusing her. Mia didn't speak for a while. Then she whispered, "I don't have a place." Daniel felt a small pull in his chest. A simple answer, but a heavy truth. "How long has it been like that?" he asked. She shook her head. "I don't know. A long time." He didn't push her. Something in her posture, her lowered eyes, the small way she held her hands, told him she was used to being questioned, judged, dismissed. He didn't want to be another person who made her feel like she needed to defend herself. Instead, he said, "You shouldn't have to live outside, especially not in this weather." Mia didn't respond. She just sat quietly, almost waiting for the moment to pass. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, uncertain. "Do you have anyone? Family? Friends?" Her answer came quickly this time. "No." He felt that small pull again, stronger this time. Mia glanced toward the window, as if the outside world was calling her back. "Thank you for the food," she said softly. "I should go." "Go where?" She hesitated. "I have my piano," he frowned. "Mia, that piano isn't a place to live. It's freezing outside." "I know," she said, her voice barely above. A whisper. Daniel didn't want to make her uncomfortable. He didn't want to push her into something she wasn't ready for. But he also couldn't shake the feeling that walking away from her now would be wrong. "Do you want help?" he asked. Carefully, her eyes lifted slowly. They weren't angry or defensive. They were tired, the kind of tired that comes from having to survive day after day with no one to rely on. "What kind of help?" she asked. "I know some people," Daniel said. "People who help kids your age. They can give you a safe place to sleep, food, a shower. Nothing strange or forced. Just real help." Mia stared at him for a long time. Her expression didn't change much, but something in her eyes shifted: fear, hope, confusion, all tangled together. "Why would you do that for me?" she whispered. Daniel didn't have a clean, simple answer. He didn't feel like some hero. He wasn't trying to fix everything. He just knew that ignoring her didn't feel right. "Because you deserve better than the cold pavement," he said honestly. She blinked slowly, unsure whether to believe him. A moment passed. She picked up her fork, moving it between her fingers, as though she needed something to hold on to. Then she asked, in a tiny voice, "If I say yes, what happens?" "You meet someone I trust," Daniel said. "They'll talk to you. They'll help you figure out what you need. You won't be alone." The word "alone" made her flinch slightly. She looked down at her half-empty plate, then at her hands, then at him. Finally, she whispered, "Okay, but only for a little." Daniel nodded, relieved. "That's fine, just a little. You can decide how long." The server came by again to clear the plates, smiling warmly at Mia. The girl managed a quiet thank you that made the server pause in pleasant surprise. When they stepped outside again, the cold hit them instantly. Mia pulled her thin jacket tighter around herself. Daniel watched her for a moment, realizing just how small she seemed compared to the big, loud city behind her. "Come with me," he said gently. Mia nodded. They started walking, and as they did, Daniel noticed she stayed half a step behind him, as though she didn't want to bother him by walking beside him. He slowed down slightly so she would be closer, but she still kept her distance. They reached the corner of the plaza where the piano sat. Mia stopped for a moment, looking at it with a strange mixture of attachment and sadness. "You can come back," Daniel said softly. "It's not going anywhere." She nodded again, brushing her hair back from her face. "Okay, A small silence passed between them. "Mia," Daniel said, "we're going to get you somewhere warm." She looked at him with quiet uncertainty. But she didn't step back. And to him, that was the first sign she was beginning to trust him. The city moved around them with its usual rush. But for the two of them, something had changed. One simple moment, a joke about a piano, had become the first step in a path neither of them had expected. And neither of them knew it yet, but this was only the beginning of a decision that would change both of their lives in ways they couldn't imagine. Part 3. The walk across town took longer than Daniel expected, mostly because he slowed his pace again and again without making it obvious. Mia walked beside him in quiet steps, her eyes drifting from the ground to the buildings around them. She moved like someone who wasn't used to being noticed. Someone who tried hard not to take too much space in the world. As they crossed a busy intersection. She tugged her sleeves down over her hands, hiding her fingers from the cold wind. Daniel noticed, but he didn't say anything. He didn't want her to feel self-conscious. He could see that just being beside someone like him dressed well, walking confidently made her feel out of place. "You don't have to be nervous," he said finally, keeping his tone soft. She didn't look at him. "I'm not nervous." He didn't argue. He just nodded. If she wanted to pretend she wasn't scared, he would let her keep that small piece of pride. They walked another block before she asked quietly, "Where are we going?" "To meet someone I trust," Daniel said. "He runs a small program for young people who need help. Nothing scary. They won't force you to do anything you don't want." She listened but didn't respond. Her silence wasn't rude. It was careful, as if she were weighing every word. He said, Daniel pointed to a building up ahead. It wasn't tall or fancy, but it had large windows and a sign that read River House Youth Center. Kids and teens walked in and out, some laughing, some carrying backpacks, some just looking for a place to stay warm. Mia stopped walking, her eyes fixed on the building. She didn't move forward. Her shoulders tensed again, and her fingers curled into her sleeves. "You said it was small," she whispered. "It is," Daniel assured her. "It just looks busy because a lot of kids come here after school." She swallowed, shaking her head slightly. "I don't know." Daniel turned to face her fully. He didn't step closer, not wanting to make her feel trapped. "You're not going inside alone. I'll go with you. And you don't have to stay if you don't want to. Just meet someone. Just talk. That's all." Mia looked at the ground. A car drove past, splashing water from a small puddle. She didn't even flinch. She was too lost in her thoughts. After a long moment, she finally nodded. "Okay," she whispered. They walked toward the building together. As they reached the door, she hesitated again. Her hand lifted as if she might pull the door open, then stopped halfway. Daniel gently opened it for her. Inside, the air was warmer. The lobby was bright, with soft chairs and a front desk decorated with drawings made by kids. A woman sat behind the desk, sorting papers, and she looked up with a welcoming smile. "Good morning," she said brightly. "How can I help you?" Daniel returned a polite smile. "Is the director here?" "He's in his office," she said. "I'll let him know you're here." She stepped away to make a call. While she did, Mia stood very still beside Daniel, her arms pressed tightly against her body. Her eyes darted around the room, as if unsure what she was allowed to look at. There were other teens in the lobby, some chatting, some playing board games at a table. A few glanced at her, not with judgment, but curiosity. Still, she seemed to shrink a little. Daniel leaned slightly toward her. "You're okay," he said softly. She didn't say anything, but her breathing steadied. A moment later, a man walked into the lobby. He looked friendly but tired in a gentle, warm way, the kind of tired someone gets from helping more than they sleep. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and he had a stack of papers under one arm. He smiled when he saw Daniel. "You actually came by," he said with a surprised laugh. "I didn't expect that." Daniel shrugged lightly. "Something happened this morning. Thought you could help." The man whose name was Ben turned his eyes to Mia. He didn't stare or try to make her uncomfortable. Instead, he softened his smile and spoke in a voice as gentle as a teacher. "Hi there," he said. "I'm Ben." Mia didn't respond at first. She gave a small nod, but avoided his eyes. "It's nice to meet you," he added. She nodded again. Daniel gestured toward a hallway. "Can we talk in your office?" "Of course," Ben said. He led them down a quiet hallway. His office was small but warm, with posters of music, art supplies on shelves, and a large window letting in natural light. There were soft chairs instead of stiff ones, and everything about the room felt carefully arranged to make people feel safe. Mia sat down slowly, folding her hands in her lap. Daniel took the chair beside her, while Ben sat across from them. "So," Ben said gently, "how about we start with your name?" "Mia," she said very softly. "Hi, Mia," Ben said with a kind smile. "Thanks for being here. I know it's not easy to walk into a new place." She gave a tiny nod, her fingers tightening together. Ben glanced at Daniel, silently asking if he should continue. Daniel nodded. Double quotes Mia. Daniel said, "I heard you play the piano this morning. You're incredibly talented." Her cheeks warmed slightly. "I just try," she whispered. Ben smiled. "Trying like that is rare. Most kids your age don't play with that kind of emotion." She didn't answer, but she didn't shrink away either. Ben leaned forward slightly. "Can I ask where you've been staying?" "No pressure, just so we know how to help." Mia stared at her hands. Her voice was almost a whisper. "I don't have a place." Ben nodded slowly, not reacting with shock or pity. "Thank you for telling us," he said softly. "That's okay. You're not the only one. We help kids your age every day." She looked up briefly, her eyes filled with caution. "We're not here to control you," Ben continued. "We don't force anyone to stay. We just give options. A warm bed, food, someone to talk to if you want." Mia's breathing grew a little unsteady. She pressed her fingers together tightly. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Mia, you don't have to decide right now. Just listen. That's all." She nodded again. Ben opened a folder on his desk, flipping through pages. "We have a small residence not far from here," he explained. "Safe rooms, clean, staff on duty. Other girls your age staying there too. It's calm. You'd have your own space." Mia's eyes softened, just a little. "A room of her own. She hadn't had that in a long time," Ben continued. "You'd have access to meals, warm clothes, a shower. You could use the music room any time you want." That made her attention shift slightly. "Music room?" Ben nodded. "With a full piano. Better than the one in the plaza." A tiny flicker of interest lit behind her eyes. "But," she began softly, then stopped. "What is it?" Daniel asked gently. She looked at both of them, fear creeping back into her expression. "What if I can't stay long? What if I'm not good enough? What if they don't want me there?" Ben shook his head firmly, but gently. "There's no good enough here. We don't judge people for their past or how long they stay. You'd be welcome, even if it's just for a night." She thought about that. Her foot tapped lightly on the floor, a nervous habit she seemed unaware of. "You don't have to trust us yet," Ben said softly. "Trust takes time. But you can take one step today." "Just one?" Mia looked at Daniel for a moment, her eyes searching his face. He kept his expression calm and steady. "You helped me this morning," she whispered. "Why?" Daniel took a slow breath. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe because I saw something special in you. Maybe because you reminded me that life isn't just about business meetings. And maybe because I didn't want to walk away knowing you'd be alone again." Her eyes softened, just slightly. "So," Ben asked gently, "do you want to see the residence? You don't have to stay. You can just look." Mia hesitated, a long, heavy hesitation filled with old fears and fragile hope. Then she whispered the word that surprised even her. "Okay." Ben stood up with a warm smile. "Great, let's go take a look." Mia rose from her chair slowly. She seemed unsure whether she was making the right choice. But she didn't step back. As they walked out of the office, Daniel steadied her by walking loosely beside her, not guiding her, not pushing her forward, but simply being a presence she could lean on if she needed. They stepped into a quiet part of the center, past a door with a keypad. Ben typed a code and motioned for them to go inside. The hallway beyond was calm and bright, decorated with student artwork and small photos of smiling faces. Mia looked at everything carefully, almost cautiously. "This is the residence area," Ben explained. "Only the teens staying here, and the staff have access." Mia's steps slowed. She listened closely, as if every sound mattered to her. They reached an open room where two girls sat at a table doing homework. They glanced up and gave small, friendly smiles. Mia quickly looked down. "It's okay," Daniel whispered. "They're just saying hi." She nodded, though she still seemed unsure. Ben opened the door to a small room. It had a bed, a desk, a dresser, and a small window with soft curtains. "It's simple," he said, "but it's yours if you want it. You can stay for a night, a week, or longer. No pressure." Mia stepped inside slowly. She touched the edge of the desk with her fingertips, then the blanket on the bed. She sat down gently, as if she thought the bed might disappear. A quiet breath slipped from her chest, half relief, half disbelief. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, watching her. He didn't speak. He didn't want to break the moment. Ben placed a small welcome bag on the dresser, some toiletries, a warm sweater, a notebook, and a pair of socks. "For you," he said kindly. Mia blinked at the bag. "Why?" "Because everyone deserves a fresh start," Ben said simply. She lowered her eyes and nodded. After a moment, she whispered, "Can I stay?" "Just tonight?" Ben smiled warmly. "Of course. Just tonight. And tomorrow, you can decide again." Mia looked at Daniel. "Thank you," she said quietly. He didn't. The hours after the audition seemed to stretch longer than usual. He walked out of the building with the girl beside him, and even though she tried to act calm, anyone could see the worry behind her eyes. Her hands were twisted together, and she kept pressing her fingers into her palms, as if that would steady her. The street outside was busy, full of people heading home from work or rushing to catch buses, but she seemed to hear none of it. She just kept glancing back at the entrance, as if someone might come running out with news. He noticed her quiet tension and slowed down his steps, making sure she didn't feel rushed. There was something about her silence. It wasn't the empty kind. It carried a weight, like she was trying to hold herself together, unsure if she should hope for something good or prepare for disappointment. "You did well," he finally said, keeping his voice light so it wouldn't sound like pressure. She shook her head. "I don't know. What if they didn't like it?" "They liked it," he said simply. "You saw their faces." She didn't argue, but she didn't agree either. It was clear she wasn't used to good things happening, so believing them felt risky. She walked with small steps. Her shoulders curved inward like she expected someone to tell her she didn't belong there. He guided her to a small cafe nearby. They found a table in the corner, and she hesitated before sitting, almost like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to be there. When the waiter came, she lowered her gaze and spoke very softly, just loud enough to order a sandwich and tea. as they waited. He watched her gently tap her fingers against the table, a habit she did without thinking. It was the movement of someone who spent years using music as a quiet escape. After a moment, he said, "You know, talent like yours doesn't come around often." She looked up quickly, her eyes wide. "Please don't say that unless it's true." "It is true," he said, "and you're going to get a chance. I'm sure of it." The food arrived, and she ate slowly at first, then a bit faster once she felt comfortable. He didn't say much while she ate. He wanted her to feel safe, not watched. When they stepped back outside, the sky had shifted into a soft evening glow. She hugged her coat tighter as they walked toward the foundation building where she'd been staying temporarily. It wasn't a perfect place, but it was warm, clean, and safe, which already made it better than anything she'd had in a long time. "You can go in," he told her once they reached the entrance. "I'll wait outside until they call with the results." Her eyes widened again. "You don't have to wait." "I know," he said, "but I want to." She hesitated, then gave a tiny nod before heading inside. He sat on a bench outside the door. People passed by. Cars moved steadily down the street, but he barely noticed any of it. He kept checking his phone, half wishing it would ring and half nervous that it would. Minutes stretched into an hour. The sky grew darker. A cool breeze swept through the street. He was just about to stand and walk around to stretch his legs when his phone, vibrate. He stared at the screen. The number was from the conservatory. He answered quickly. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was calm, polite, and warm. After the greeting, there was a pause, and he held his breath without meaning to. Then the words came. "She's been accepted. Full scholarship. We would like to discuss details with you and her as soon as possible." He closed his eyes for a second, relief washing through him like a warm wave. "Thank you," he said, trying not to sound too emotional. "Thank you very much." The call ended. He stood up fast, almost too fast, and headed straight toward the building's door. He took a breath before knocking, not wanting to rush in with too much excitement and overwhelm her. One of the staff members answered and smiled immediately. "Are you here for her?" "Yes," he said. "She's in the common room. She hasn't stopped pacing since she walked in." He laughed softly at that, then followed the staff member down the hallway. When they reached the doorway, he saw her instantly. She was pacing back and forth, chewing her lip and wringing her hands. She turned when she heard footsteps. Her eyes locked on his face, searching, afraid, hoping. He didn't make her wait. "You got it." She froze. For a moment she didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't move. Then her knees bent slightly as if she might sink down, and she grabbed the back of a chair for balance. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. He stepped closer. A full scholarship. Tuition, housing, support, everything. Her eyes filled instantly, not with loud tears, but with the silent kind that slip out before the person even realizes they're crying. She wiped at her face quickly, embarrassed, like she thought crying wasn't allowed. "You did it?" he said gently. "This is because of what you did today. Your talent, your hard work." She shook her head, still overwhelmed. "No, you helped me. I wouldn't have even gotten in the door without you. You walked through it yourself," he said. "No one carried you." She let out a small, breathy laugh, the kind people make when they're too happy and too shocked at the same time. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." The staff in the room were smiling quietly, moved by her reaction. One of them stepped forward and said, "We'll help her get ready for the move, and we'll go over the paperwork with both of you when you're ready." She nodded, still wiping at her eyes. "Okay." He could see she needed a moment, so he said, "I'll wait outside. Come find me when you're ready." She nodded again and gave a soft, grateful smile before going with the staff. He returned to the hallway and leaned against the wall, taking a slow breath. It wasn't his victory, but it felt as close to one as anything he'd experienced in a long time. A few minutes later, she came out. Her face was calmer now, though traces of tears still lined her cheeks. She looked different, not because of her clothes or her posture, but because there was finally light in her expression, a spark of hope that hadn't been there before. "Where to now?" she asked. "That depends on you," he said. She thought for a moment. "Can we walk for a bit?" "Of course." They stepped outside together. The night air was cool, but pleasant. Streetlights lit the sidewalks with a warm glow. They walked without speaking for several minutes, the quiet between them comfortable. Finally, she said softly, "I didn't think things like this happened to people like me." "Why not you?" he asked. She shrugged. "Some people are just unlucky for a long time, and after a while, they think that's all they'll ever be." He nodded. "Sometimes luck is just a moment that needed someone to notice." She looked up at him. "Thank you for noticing." He smiled. "I'm glad I did." They kept walking, passing shop windows and people heading home. She paused at one store where instruments were displayed. A small piano keyboard sat in the window, the soft light shining across the keys. She stared at it quietly. "Do you miss having one?" he asked. Her voice came out, small but honest. "Every day." He nodded thoughtfully, but didn't say more. He didn't want to overwhelm her on a night already full of big emotions. They reached the corner of the street where they usually parted ways. She turned to him and said, "I'm scared." He waited. "Of what?" "What if I can't handle it? What if I'm not good enough? What if they realize they made a mistake?" He shook his head gently. "They're trained to spot talent. They didn't make a mistake." "But what if—" "You don't have to be perfect," he said. "You just have to try. And you've been trying your whole life without anyone helping you." She breathed in slowly, letting his words settle. "I'll try," she whispered. "That's all you need to do." She nodded. "Good night." "Good night," he said. She walked back toward the foundation, slower this time, like she was absorbing each step. He stayed where he was for a moment, watching her until she turned the corner. The night felt quieter somehow, peaceful. He knew there was still a long road ahead for her. Scholarships, classes, new challenges, none of it would be easy. But tonight was a beginning, and for someone who had spent so long feeling invisible, a beginning was enough. He turned and walked down the opposite street, feeling lighter than he had in years, not because of anything he gained, but because of the hope he had seen in someone who finally believed she had a chance. And this time, she truly did. The morning of her big audition arrived much earlier than she expected. She barely slept the night before, not because she wasn't tired, but because every time she closed her eyes, her mind kept running through the same worries. What if she forgot her piece? What if her fingers froze? What if everyone looked at her the way people used to, like she didn't belong anywhere? When she finally got out of bed, the sun hadn't even risen yet. The sky outside the window was still dark, and the air in her small room felt cold. She sat up slowly, pulling her legs close for a moment, just to steady her breathing. This was the kind of day that could change her life completely, and knowing that made everything feel heavier. She dressed quietly and sat on the edge of her bed, rubbing her hands together for warmth. They were cold from nerves more than anything else, but she kept trying to loosen them. She remembered how the piano keys felt under her fingers, smooth, steady, familiar. That helped a little. A soft knock sounded at her door. She stood, opened it, and saw one of the foundation staff smiling softly. "You ready?" they asked. She nodded, even though she didn't feel ready at all. But she knew she had to go. They walked her down to the lobby, where he was already waiting. When he saw her, he stood up straight, giving a calm smile. He could tell she was nervous, but he didn't mention it. Instead, he said, "You look prepared." She let out a tiny laugh. "I feel like I'm going to fall over." "That just means it matters to you," he said. "That's normal." They stepped outside, where the morning air was crisp. The sky was finally turning light, streaked with soft shades of peach and pale blue. The city was quieter than usual, and the streets felt calmer. Like even the world around them understood that this day was important. During the car ride to the conservatory, she stared out the window, watching buildings pass like slow-moving shadows. He didn't talk much, giving her space to gather her thoughts. Still, every so often, she felt him glance her way to make sure she was all right. When they reached the conservatory, she stepped out of the car and looked up at the tall building. Its glass windows reflected the soft morning light, making it look almost unreal. People didn't usually come here unless they were already someone special. She wasn't sure she fit that description yet. He walked beside her as they entered through the main doors. The inside of the building was even more beautiful polished floors, wide hallways, and soft music playing from distant practice rooms. She felt small in the middle of it all, but pushed herself to take slow breaths. They checked her in at the front desk and were told to wait in one of the side halls. Chairs were lined up along the wall, and a few other students her age sat nearby. Most had music sheets in hand or humming quietly, already in their own worlds. She sat down, her hands resting on her lap, tapping lightly against each other. "You don't have to be perfect," he whispered to her. "Just be you." They saw something special the first time today is only the next step. She nodded, but didn't look up. If she met his eyes, she worried she might start shaking again. Minutes passed. One by one, the other students were called in. Some came out looking happy, others stressed, a few almost in tears. She watched each of them, wondering which reaction she would have. Then her name was called. Her heart did a strange, heavy jump in her chest. She looked at him. He gave a small nod, a reassuring smile, and said, "Go, you've earned this." She stood slowly and followed the staff member through the hallway and into a large, quiet room. At the far end sat 3 judges behind a long table. They were serious, but not unfriendly, each holding notes and sheets. In the center of the room sat the piano. The moment she saw it, everything around her faded just a little. The lights, the sound of footsteps, even the judge's eyes, they all became distant. That piano was the one place she knew how to breathe. "Take your time," one judge said. She walked toward the instrument with careful steps. She sat down on the bench, letting her fingers float for a second above the keys. They weren't shaking as much now. The familiar sense of calm from the music began to settle inside her. She closed her eyes and took the softest breath. Then she started playing. The sound filled the room, like it belonged there. Each note blended with the next, smooth and steady, yet emotional in a way that made the judges sit up a little straighter. She didn't think about the people watching her. She didn't think about her past or her fear or the cold mornings she spent trying to stay alive. All she thought about was the story she wanted the song to tell. Her hands moved with feeling soft at some moments, stronger at others. Every rise and fall of the melody carried something she had held inside for years. Sadness, loneliness, hope, and the tiny, fragile belief that maybe, just maybe, she had a place in the world after all. When she finished, the last note lingered in the air for a moment before fading. She kept her hands on the keys, breathing slowly, afraid to look up. Finally, she lifted her head. All 3 judges were watching her with expressions she did not expect. Soft, thoughtful, almost emotional. "Thank you," one of them said quietly. Another leaned forward. "How long have you been playing?" She answered honestly, "Since I was little." "Private lessons?" the judge asked. She shook her head. "Just practice." The judges exchanged glances, the kind people make when they share an unspoken agreement. "You may step out," one said kindly. "We'll speak with you soon." She stood slowly and walked out of the room, her legs a little unsteady. When she returned to the waiting hall, he immediately stood up. "Well?" he asked gently. "I think." She swallowed hard. "I think it went well." He smiled. "Good. You look like someone who did something brave." They were told to wait in the main lobby for the final results. She sat beside him, and this time he talked just enough to keep her from sinking into worry again. He pointed out small details in the lobby, the artwork on the wall, the soft lighting, the unusual design, just to give her mind a break. After about half an hour, a woman from the conservatory walked toward them. Her steps were steadied with purpose, and she held a folder in her hand. Both of them stood up. The woman smiled warmly. "Congratulations," she said. "You've been awarded a full scholarship." Everything around her went silent for a moment. It felt unreal, as if the words didn't belong to her. A full. She couldn't even finish the sentence. "Yes?" the woman said. "Full tuition, full housing, instrument access, and additional support services. You'll begin next term." The girl covered her mouth with both hands, tears forming, but not falling yet. She shook her head lightly, as if trying to make sure she wasn't imagining all of this. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he whispered. A small sound escaped her, a mix between a laugh and a gasp. She finally let a few tears fall, but wiped them quickly, afraid she might break down in front of people. "Thank you," she said to the woman, her voice trembling. "Thank you so much." "You earned it," the woman replied kindly. After signing a few papers and receiving instructions about next steps, they left the building together. The moment the doors closed behind them, she breathed out a long, shaky breath and put her hands on her knees like she needed the air. He chuckled softly. "Are you all right?" "No," she said honestly, laughing through leftover nerves. "I feel like I'm floating." "That's a good sign," he said. They walked slowly toward the street. Her steps were different. Now, not heavy with worry, not cautious like someone afraid of the world. There was something new in them. Something light. Something bright. They stopped near a bench outside the conservatory. She sat down, looking at the building that now held her future. "Do you think I can really do this?" she asked, her voice quiet but no longer filled with fear. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "You already have." She looked at her hands, the same hands that had once played on a public piano for spare change. They didn't look different, but everything about them felt different now. She turned her head toward him. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else did." "I didn't believe in you before seeing your talent," he said. "I believed in you after seeing your strength." She smiled, not the small nervous smile she used to make, but a real one, soft and hopeful. They sat there for a while, letting the moment settle in. Cars passed, people walked by. The sun rose higher, filling the street with warm morning light. For the first time in her life, the future didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something waiting for her, and she was finally ready to step into it. The next few days moved slowly for her, as if time itself was unsure which direction to go. She continued working her shifts at the cafe, greeting customers, wiping tables, and refilling cups. But in the back of her mind, the invitation kept returning like a soft tap on her shoulder. It wasn't something she could forget, even if she wanted to. Every time she passed the old upright piano in the corner, she felt a gentle reminder of the strange turn her life had taken. She didn't talk about the invitation much. A few of the workers asked if she was going to accept, but she didn't give a clear answer. It wasn't that she didn't want to go. She just didn't know what it might lead to. And she had learned long ago that opportunities weren't always what they seemed. Still, she found herself imagining what it might be like playing in front of people who weren't rushing, weren't stressed, weren't ordering 5 things at once. Maybe they'd actually want to hear her. That thought alone stirred something in her chest. On one of the quieter evenings, after the cafe had closed and most workers had gone home, she stood by the piano again. The lights were dim, and only a few lamps were on, casting warm glows on empty tables. She sat down gently, letting her fingers hover above the keys. The memory of that day, when the room fell silent as she played, came back clearly. She pressed a soft chord, then another, letting the notes fill the space dot. She didn't play for long, but it was enough to remind her of how much she loved the music itself. Not the attention, not the reactions, just the sound. When she got home that night, she sat at her small kitchen table and finally looked at the slip of paper. The man had left with a date and address for the gathering. The handwriting was neat, the ink bold. She touched the edges of the paper, thinking about everything that had happened. It felt risky. But something in her heart whispered that saying no might be something she'd regret later. By the time she went to bed, she still hadn't made a final decision, but her mind leaned gently toward yes. The following morning, the cafe was busier than usual, and the air was filled with the familiar sounds of coffee machines and quiet chatter. She worked quickly, moving from table to table, and tried her best not to think too much. But the universe had a strange sense of timing. Just as she stepped toward the front counter, the doors opened again, and in walked the same man. He didn't bring attention to himself, didn't demand anything, didn't even look around the room with the same energy he had the first time. Instead, he walked up slowly, stopping at the counter with a polite smile. "Good morning," he said. She blinked in surprise. "You're here early." "Just passing by," he said, though his tone hinted otherwise. "Thought I'd stop in." She sensed he was nervous, though he tried to hide it. Somehow that made him seem more human, less like the confident figure she first met. "Can I get you something?" she asked. "Just a coffee," he replied. "And, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask how you're feeling about the invitation. But only if you want to talk about it." She appreciated the way he said it. No pushing, no hint of expectation. She prepared the coffee, then handed it to him. "I'm thinking about it," she said. He nodded. "That's perfectly fine. Take all the time you need." But she could see in his eyes that he was hopeful, not in a selfish way, but in a way that suggested he genuinely believed she deserved the chance. She wiped her hands on her apron and leaned slightly closer, her voice low. "Why do you want me to play at your gathering?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down at his cup, as if choosing his words carefully. "When I heard you play," he said finally, "I felt something I haven't felt in years. I've been to concerts, dinners, events, but nothing hit me the way your music did. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was honest. And I realized that sometimes the most powerful moments come from unexpected places." His sincerity made her chest tighten, not in a painful way, but in the way someone reacts when they feel seen. "I don't want to put you in an uncomfortable situation," he added. "I just want people to hear what I heard." She didn't know what to say for a moment, but then gently she replied, I think I might come." He looked up quickly, his expression brightening with relief and gratitude. But he didn't react too loudly or too eagerly. He simply nodded with a soft smile. "I'm glad," he said. "And if you change your mind at any point, that's fine too." Something in her relaxed. She appreciated not being boxed in. The next few days passed with a new sense of quiet anticipation. She prepared herself mentally, though she didn't practice much. She didn't want to overthink the event. Her talent came naturally when she let herself feel instead of forcing anything. When the day finally arrived, she stood in front of her small mirror, smoothing her hair and adjusting the simple but neat outfit she'd chosen. She didn't want to overdress, but she also didn't want to show up looking like she'd come straight from a shift. After a few minutes, she took a deep breath and headed out. The man's home was larger than she expected, sitting on a quiet street lined with tall trees and soft lights. When she reached the front door, she paused for a moment. Steadying herself, she knocked lightly. The door opened almost immediately, and he stood there looking pleasantly surprised. "You came," he said warmly. She nodded. "I said I would." He stepped aside and motioned her in. The interior of the house was warm and inviting, not showy, not overly fancy, just full of natural light and thoughtful decor. Soft music played in the background, and a small crowd of people mingled in different corners of the room. "Let me introduce you to everyone," he said. But she held up her hand gently. "Maybe later," she said. "I'd like to see where I'll be playing first." "Of course," he said, accepting her request without hesitation. He led her to a room just off the main area, music room with a polished grand piano at the center. The sight of it made her breath catch slightly. She touched the edge of the instrument, feeling its smooth surface. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He watched her quietly, not wanting to interrupt the moment. "You can play whenever you're ready," he said. "No rush. People will join once they hear the music." She sat down slowly, adjusting the bench until she felt comfortable. Her fingers hovered above the keys, the same way they had so many times before. She pressed a single note dot. It rang out pure and warm, filling the small room. She closed her eyes, took a soft breath, and began to play. The melody flowed out of her like a story she'd been holding inside for years. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't complicated. It was simply honest, like the man said before. Within minutes, people drifted into the room, drawn by the music. Conversations faded, footsteps quieted, and soon the small crowd stood around her, listening with full attention. She felt their presence, but it didn't scare her. The piano felt like home, and the sound around her felt like a warm embrace. When she finished, the room stayed silent for a moment, just long enough to feel like the world itself had paused. Then the applause came. It wasn't loud or wild. It was heartfelt, steady, full of appreciation. She looked up, her eyes meeting his across the room. He didn't clap the hardest, but his expression said everything. Pride, gratitude, respect. She stood slowly, overwhelmed but calm. One of the guests stepped forward and said, "That was beautiful. Truly beautiful." Others followed with kind words, gentle smiles, and warm compliments. For the first time in a long while, she felt something she couldn't name, something beyond happiness. She felt valued. As the night went on, she played a few more pieces. Each one met with the same thoughtful attention. People approached her with kind questions, curious about her background, her music, her story. No one made her feel small. No one judged her. It was a world she had never been part of, yet she felt strangely welcomed. When the evening finally came to an end and the guests began to leave, a man approached her quietly. "Thank you for coming," he said sincerely. "You made tonight unforgettable." She smiled softly. "I'm glad I said yes." He hesitated before asking, "Would you consider coming again sometime?" "No pressure, just if you'd like to." She looked at the grand piano, then back at him. "Yes," she said, "I think I would." And as she walked out of the house that night, the cool air brushing against her skin, she felt something blooming inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope.